John Carter had always lived a quiet life. He was a man of routine, a logical thinker, an aerospace engineer who spent his nights working on classified government projects. But nothing in his life had prepared him for what he saw when he woke up that morning. The first thing he noticed was the dim red glow of his alarm clock flashing erratically, as if it had been disrupted by some electrical surge. The air smelled strange, like burnt metal mixed with something almost otherworldly. A cold draft brushed over his skin, making him shiver. Something was off. And then he saw her. Lying next to him on the bed was a girl, except she wasn't human. Her skin shimmered like liquid silver under the morning light, smooth and flawless. Her hair, dark blue with streaks of silver, cascaded over his pillow. She wore a sleek, form-fitting suit made of some kind of futuristic material, torn in places as if she had been in a fight. But the most shocking thing was her eyes. Deep violet, glowing faintly, staring at him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. John froze, his heart slamming against his ribs. He blinked, thinking maybe he was still dreaming. But then she moved. She gasped sharply and sat up, clutching her side as if in pain. Her breathing was ragged, and John could see faint traces of glowing blue blood seeping through a tear in her suit. His instincts screamed at him to run, to get as far away from her as possible. But before he could even move, she spoke. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You have to help me." John's mind raced. Who was she? What was she doing here? And most importantly, who was coming? Before he could ask, a strange, high-pitched beeping noise filled the room. His eyes darted to her hand, where she clutched a small disc-like device. The holographic display above it flickered erratically, flashing symbols he couldn't understand. But then, in English, the words materialized before his eyes. "Incoming hostile forces detected." A chill ran down his spine. This wasn't just some bizarre dream. This was real. The girl winced, struggling to stand. John instinctively reached out to steady her, his hands hesitating as they touched her cool, metallic-like skin. She looked up at him, those glowing violet eyes filled with urgency. "They found me," she said, her voice stronger now. "We need to move. Now." John was about to ask what the hell was going on when the entire building trembled. A deafening boom echoed through the air, and a blinding light flared through his bedroom window. He barely had time to react before the shockwave hit, shattering the glass and sending him sprawling to the floor. Ears ringing, heart pounding, he pushed himself up just in time to see a massive aircraft hovering outside his apartment. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. Sleek, black, with glowing red symbols pulsating along its surface. And it wasn't alone. Smaller drones zipped through the sky, scanning the buildings with eerie blue lights. John barely had time to process any of it before the girl grabbed his wrist and pulled him to his feet. "We have to go," she shouted over the noise. Still disoriented, John let himself be dragged toward the door. The girl moved with an urgency that told him she knew exactly what was happening, and that terrified him. Just as they reached the hallway, the ceiling behind them exploded. A metallic creature, humanoid but clearly robotic, crashed through the debris, its glowing red eyes locking onto them. It raised its arm, and a bright energy charge formed in its palm. John barely had time to curse before the girl shoved him aside and raised her own hand. A pulse of blue light shot from her fingertips, slamming into the machine's chest and sending it flying backward. John stared in shock. She had powers. The girl didn't give him time to think. She grabbed his arm again, pulling him down the hallway as more explosions rocked the building. "They won't stop until they have me," she said breathlessly. "And now you're a target too." John didn't know who they were, but one thing was clear. His life had just changed forever. John's breath came in ragged gasps as he sprinted down the hallway, his bare feet slapping against the cold floor. The alien girl's grip on his wrist was firm, her strength unnatural for someone who looked so delicate. Behind them, The mechanical invader recovered, its glowing red eyes locking onto them once more. John risked a glance over his shoulder, just as the robot raised its arm. A burst of red energy shot from its palm, sizzling past his ear and striking the wall beside them. The explosion sent chunks of plaster flying. Dust and smoke filled the air, making it harder to see, harder to breathe. "This way," the girl shouted, pulling him toward the stairwell. John didn't argue. His mind was still struggling to catch up. Just minutes ago, he had woken up to find a strange alien girl in his bed. Now his apartment was under attack by what looked like advanced killer robots. This had to be a nightmare. It had to be. But the heat from that last explosion was all too real. They burst through the stairwell door and rushed downward. The girl moved like she had done this before, barely making a sound despite her speed. John tried to keep up, but his mind was a whirlwind of unanswered questions. "Who are they?" he panted. "Hunters," she said simply. John frowned. "Yeah, I figured that much. But why are they after you?" The girl hesitated as they rounded another corner. A moment of silence passed between them before she finally answered. "Because I ran away." Before John could ask more, another explosion rocked the building. The stairwell trembled, dust and debris raining down from above. The lights flickered, and for a second, the entire world seemed to slow down. Then the ceiling cracked. "Move," the girl shouted, shoving him forward just as a chunk of concrete came crashing down behind them. John nearly stumbled but kept going, his heart pounding in his chest. Whatever this girl was involved in, it was way above his pay grade. But right now, all he could do was survive. They reached the lower floors, but as soon as they pushed through the exit door into the parking lot, John's stomach dropped. The sky was filled with ships. Dozens of sleek black crafts hovered above the city, their crimson lights casting an eerie glow against the night. Smaller drones zipped between them, scanning the buildings, the streets, everything. And then the sirens started. A deep, pulsating hum reverberated through the air. It wasn't like any siren John had ever heard before. This one made his bones rattle. It wasn't meant as a warning. It was a declaration. "They've locked down the area," the girl murmured. John swallowed hard. "Great, just great. Any chance you've got an escape plan?" She turned to him, those glowing violet eyes filled with a determination that made his skin prickle. "Yes, but I'll need your help." John let out a short, humorless laugh. "Lady, I don't even know your name, and you want me to help you escape an alien death squad." The girl hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "My name is Alara." John stared at her. Alara. He tested the name on his tongue. It felt strange, yet oddly fitting. Before he could say anything else, a loud mechanical whirring sound filled the air. They both turned just in time to see one of the drones shifting its trajectory toward them. A red light pulsed on its underside. John didn't need to be a scientist to know what was about to happen. "Run." Alara grabbed his hand and yanked him forward just as the drone fired. A scorching red beam struck the pavement behind them, sending up a shower of molten rock. John's heart slammed against his ribs as he ducked behind a row of parked cars. More drones shifted in their direction. The hunt had begun. "We're not getting out of here like this," John said between heavy breaths. "There's no cover." Alara looked around quickly, calculating. Then she pointed to the opposite end of the lot. "There, that vehicle." John followed her gaze and saw his own car, a beaten-up but reliable old sedan. "You know how to drive, right?" she asked. John scoffed. "Of course I know how to drive." "Good." She tossed him a small metallic device. "Use this." John frowned, catching the object. It was a sleek, palm-sized disc with strange alien symbols on its surface. "What is it?" "Cloaking field. It'll buy us a few seconds." John didn't have time to argue. He pressed the device against his chest, and suddenly, a wave of shimmering blue energy washed over him. His body tingled, And when he looked down, he nearly gasped. He was invisible. Alara nodded approvingly. Go, get to the car. I'll distract them. John hesitated. Every survival instinct in his body told him to get the hell out of here. But another part, the part that had always been drawn to the unknown, the part that couldn't ignore the desperation in Alara's voice, told him to stay. Before he could make a decision, Alara stepped forward and raised her hand. A bright pulse of energy erupted from her palm, slamming into one of the drones. It spiraled out of control, crashing into the side of a building. The others instantly turned toward her, red lights flashing. Now, John, she shouted. John didn't waste another second. He sprinted toward his car, barely making a sound thanks to the cloaking device. He reached the driver's side and yanked the door open, jumping inside. He disabled the cloaking field, started the engine, and slammed his foot on the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement as the car lurched forward. Alara dodged another blast and leaped onto the hood just as John swerved toward her. She grabbed onto the roof, her movements impossibly fluid. John didn't slow down. He crashed through the parking lot exit, the car bouncing violently as it hit the main road. Behind them, the drones gave chase, their glowing red eyes unrelenting. This is insane, John shouted over the roar of the engine. Alara smirked, gripping the roof tightly. Welcome to my world. John gritted his teeth. If they were going to survive this, he needed a plan. And fast. John's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The old sedan roared down the empty streets, its tires screeching as he swerved around corners, dodging abandoned cars and debris. The drones were relentless, their red lights flashing like demonic eyes in the rearview mirror. Alara clung to the roof, her fingers gripping the edges of the car with unnatural ease. Every time John took a sharp turn, she moved with the vehicle, her body perfectly balanced. It was almost inhuman how effortlessly she adapted. John clenched his jaw. Questions burned in his mind, but there was no time for answers. The drone's engines whined louder. A bright red beam shot past them, scorching the pavement ahead. Hold on, John yelled. He yanked the wheel hard to the left, sending the car skidding into a narrow alleyway. The walls were tight, barely giving them enough room to fit, but the drones couldn't follow. They zoomed past, their sensors struggling to recalibrate. John didn't slow down. He punched the gas, speeding through the alley until it opened into an old industrial district. Rusted shipping containers lined the area, their shadows stretching long under the flickering streetlights. Alara tapped the roof. There, the storm drain. John's eyes darted to the large metal grate ahead. It was partially open, just big enough for them to fit through. He didn't question it. He aimed straight for it. At the last second, Alara pushed off the roof and landed beside the entrance, rolling smoothly onto her feet. John slammed the brakes and jumped out. They didn't have much time before the drone circled back. Help me with this, Alara shouted, gripping the edge of the metal grate. John rushed over and grabbed the other side. Together, they yanked it open just as the distant hum of the drones grew louder. Go, she urged. John slid inside first, his feet landing on the damp concrete below. Alara followed, pulling the grate back over the opening just as red lights flickered above. They held their breath. The drones hovered, scanning the area with cold precision. John could feel the tension in the air, the weight of an invisible gaze hunting them. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the hum of the drones faded. John exhaled, leaning against the damp wall. His heart was still pounding, adrenaline still surging through his veins. Alara knelt beside him, listening carefully. Her violet eyes gleamed faintly in the darkness. When she was sure the danger had passed, she finally relaxed. That was close, she muttered. John let out a dry laugh. Close. That was insane. She turned to him, her gaze intense. Are you hurt? John shook his head, brushing dirt off his arms. No, but I think I lost a few years of my life back there. Alara smirked. You handled yourself well. John raised an eyebrow. For a guy who just found out aliens are real and is running for his life. She nodded. Exactly. John sighed, looking around. The underground tunnel stretched into darkness, the distant sound of dripping water echoing through the air. It smelled of rust and damp earth, but at least it was safe. For now, Alara said, as if reading his mind. John turned back to her, crossing his arms. Okay, now that we're not being shot at, you mind telling me what the hell is going on? Alara hesitated. For a moment, she looked uncertain, like she wasn't sure how much to say. Finally, she sighed. I told you. I ran away. John frowned. Ran away from what? Who are those things chasing you? She hesitated again before answering. They're enforcers, hunters sent by the Dominion. John blinked. And the Dominion is? Alara met his gaze. An empire. A vast, brutal force that rules over countless worlds. John let that sink in. And you're part of them. Alara shook her head. Not anymore. John narrowed his eyes. You're a fugitive. She nodded. John ran a hand through his hair. Great. So not only am I running from killer robots, but I'm also helping a runaway alien princess or something. Alara didn't laugh. Something like that. John sighed. All right. Why are they after you? She shifted uncomfortably. Because I know things. Things they don't want anyone else to know. John's stomach twisted. Like what? Alara hesitated again. Then finally said, they're coming. For Earth. The words hit John like a punch to the gut. Wait. What? The Dominion doesn't tolerate uncontrolled species, Alara explained. They see Earth as a threat. Your kind is unpredictable, dangerous, too independent. They don't like that. John shook his head. You're telling me some alien empire wants to invade Earth, and no one knows about it. Alara nodded. They're watching, studying, waiting for the right moment. John felt a chill run down his spine. And you? Why are you helping us? Alara looked at him, and for the first time, her expression softened. Because I don't believe in what they do. I couldn't stand by and watch them destroy another world. John exhaled. This was too much, too big. He was just an ordinary guy who worked a normal job, lived a normal life. And now, he was in an underground tunnel with an alien fugitive, running from killer machines, while an intergalactic empire planned an invasion of Earth. This was beyond insane. Alara stood, dusting herself off. We can't stay here long. They'll keep searching. John looked up at her, still trying to process everything. What do we do now? She met his gaze, determination flashing in her violet eyes. We find a way to fight back. John stared at her. Fight back. Against an entire alien empire. Alara smirked. You humans are stubborn. That's what makes you dangerous. John let out a breath and pushed himself up. Great. Guess I'm in this now. Alara nodded. You are. John gave her a tired grin. Guess I could have had a normal night, but no, I had to wake up with an alien girl in my bed and end up running for my life. Alara tilted her head. Would you rather I hadn't shown up? John thought about it. He thought about the excitement, the danger, the rush of adrenaline. And then he thought about Alara, the way she looked at him, the fire in her eyes. He smirked. Nah, I think I'm starting to like this. Alara chuckled. Then let's get moving. We've got a war to stop. John took a deep breath. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. His life would never be the same again. The air inside the underground tunnels was damp and heavy. John adjusted his grip on the flashlight as he and Alara moved deeper into the maze of passageways. Every step echoed faintly, reminding him how empty and forgotten this place was. It felt like they were the last people on Earth. After what felt like hours of walking, Alara finally stopped in front of an old steel door. It was rusted at the edges, but the reinforced locks told a different story. Someone had kept this place secured. She knocked 3 times in a specific rhythm. A long pause followed, and then a hidden scanner embedded in the wall flashed green. The door slid open with a hiss. Inside, the underground hideout was alive with activity. Dozens of people, some in makeshift armor, others working on salvaged tech, looked up as they entered. Weapons lined the walls, ranging from old rifles to advanced energy-based weapons John had never seen before. Maps and holographic projections of the city flickered on nearby monitors. A grizzled man with a cybernetic arm stepped forward, his one remaining eye studying John with caution. "Who's the newcomer?" Alara placed a hand on John's shoulder. "He saved my life, and he's willing to fight." The man scoffed. "That's so. What's your name, kid?" "John Carter," he replied, straightening up. He didn't like the way the man sized him up, but he understood it. These people had probably lost everything. Trust wasn't given easily. The man crossed his arms. "Captain Darius, welcome to the Resistance." John let out a breath. Resistance. The word sounded so unreal, but here they were, in the middle of an underground war effort against an alien empire. Darius turned to Alara. "We barely made it out of the last raid. Supplies are running low, and their patrols are getting smarter. If you have a plan, now's the time to share." Alara nodded and motioned for everyone to gather around the central table. A large holographic display of Earth's major cities flickered to life. Red dots blinked aggressively across the screen. John frowned. "What are those?" Alara's expression darkened. "Dominion outposts. They're not just watching. They're preparing." Murmurs spread through the room. Darius clenched his jaw. "Damn it. So they're accelerating the invasion." "They know I escaped," Alara said, "and they know I came here. They won't wait any longer." John felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "How much time do we have?" Alara hesitated. "Days. Maybe less." The tension in the room grew thick. People exchanged uneasy glances. They were fighters, survivors, but they weren't an army. Darius let out a long breath. "Then we need to hit them first." A younger woman with short black hair shook her head. "That's suicide. We barely have enough weapons for ourselves, let alone enough to take on an armada." Alara stepped forward. "Not if we take out their command center." All eyes turned to her. She tapped on the holographic display, zooming in on a massive structure hidden beneath the Earth's surface. "This is their primary relay station. Every Dominion force on the planet receives orders from here. If we shut it down, they'll be blind. Cut off." John studied the map. "How do we do that?" Alara's fingers danced across the screen, highlighting weak points. "It's heavily shielded, but those shields require power. They're drawing energy from a planetary siphon. If we take out the siphon, their defenses drop." Darius grunted. "And let me guess, the siphon is also heavily guarded." Alara smirked. "Of course." John ran a hand through his hair. "This keeps getting better." Darius folded his arms. "We'd need a distraction. Something to pull their forces away while we take down the siphon." Alara nodded. "We split into 2 teams. One hits the Dominion's front lines, making it seem like an all-out attack. The other sneaks into the siphon facility and plants the explosives." John looked at the faces around him. These people weren't soldiers. They were survivors. Fighters, sure, but not trained professionals. "This is a huge risk," he said. "We could lose a lot of people." Alara's expression softened. "We don't have a choice. If we do nothing, the Dominion wins." Darius sighed. "She's right. We either die fighting, or we die on our knees." A heavy silence filled the room. Then, one by one, the Resistance members nodded. "We're in," the young woman said. Others echoed her sentiment. John exhaled, his heart pounding. He wasn't a soldier. He had no business being in a war. But when he looked at Alara, he saw something in her eyes. determination, hope, and something else he couldn't quite name. He clenched his fists. "All right, what's the plan?" Alara smiled. "We move at dawn." As the meeting broke up, John found himself standing alone, staring at the holographic map. Everything about this was crazy. Alara approached him quietly. "Are you all right?" John let out a dry chuckle. "Not really. I was just a normal guy a day ago. Now I'm part of some underground war." Alara tilted her head. "Regrets?" John glanced at her, studying the way the dim light reflected off her silver-blue skin. Despite everything, she looked calm, strong. He shook his head. "No regrets. Just adjusting." Alara placed a hand on his arm. "You're braver than you think, John." John swallowed. Something about the way she said his name made his chest tighten. She gave him a small smile before stepping back. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, we fight." John watched as she walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the underground base. Tomorrow, they fought. And for the first time, he wasn't just running anymore. He was ready. The air was thick with tension as the resistance gathered in the underground bunker, preparing for the battle that would decide everything. Weapons were checked, plans were reviewed, and final words were exchanged. No one spoke of fear, but John could feel it lingering beneath the surface. These people weren't trained soldiers. They were survivors, rebels, ordinary men and women who had been pushed to the brink. John stood beside Alara as she adjusted the small communication device in her ear. The soft blue glow of the holographic map illuminated her face, her expression set in grim determination. "We have one shot at this," she said, scanning the faces around the room. "We take out the siphon, and their defenses fall. But if we fail, Earth is lost." Darius stepped forward, his cybernetic arm flexing as he loaded a heavy plasma rifle. No speeches, no hesitation. "We hit them hard and fast." Alara nodded. "The main force will attack the Dominion's outer defenses. Make them believe we're throwing everything at them. Meanwhile, the infiltration team will enter the Siphon facility and plant the charges. Once the shields drop, we hit the command center." John tightened his grip on his weapon. He wasn't a soldier, but he had come too far to turn back now. He glanced at Alara. "We're going together, right?" Alara smirked. "Try to keep up, human." The resistance fighters moved out in silence, slipping through the tunnels until they reached the hidden exit. Above them, the Dominion's war machines loomed in the night sky, their dark metallic hulls reflecting the eerie glow of the city's artificial lights. The streets were eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the battle that was about to erupt. John's heart pounded as he followed Alara and the infiltration team toward the Siphon facility. The structure was massive, a towering fortress of alien metal and pulsating energy conduits. Automated sentries hovered around its perimeter, scanning the area with cold, unfeeling precision. Darius' voice crackled through the communicator. "Distraction team, move in." Almost immediately, the night was shattered by explosions. The sky lit up with streaks of plasma fire as the resistance launched their attack on the Dominion's front lines. Sirens blared across the city, and the alien forces mobilized, their sleek war machines surging forward to meet the threat. John and the others used the chaos to their advantage, slipping through the shadows and making their way to the facility's main entrance. Alara pulled out a small device and pressed it against the control panel. Sparks flew as the lock system short-circuited, and the heavy doors slid open with a low hiss. They moved quickly through the corridors, avoiding patrols and security drones. The facility hummed with power, its walls lined with alien technology far beyond anything humanity had ever known. At the heart of it all was the Siphon, a massive energy core pulsing with raw power, feeding the Dominion's planetary defenses. Alara set down her pack and began wiring the explosives. "We need to set the charges at key points around the core. Once they detonate, the entire structure will collapse." John and the others moved fast, placing the explosives while Alara calibrated the detonation sequence. Just as they finished, a sharp alarm blared through the facility. "They know we're here," John muttered, gripping his rifle. Alara cursed under her breath. "We need to move. Now." They sprinted toward the exit, but before they could reach the door, a squad of Dominion enforcers blocked their path. Tall, armored figures with glowing eyes and energy rifles raised. John didn't hesitate. He fired the first shot, and the room exploded into chaos. Plasma bolts streaked through the air, slamming into walls and sending sparks flying. The resistance fighters fought with everything they had, but the Dominion was stronger, faster, more advanced. John ducked behind a console, firing back as one of the enforcers charged at him. Alara moved like a blur, her advanced reflexes allowing her to weave through the chaos, taking down enemies with precision strikes. The battle was brutal, but they had no choice but to push forward. John took down an enforcer with a well-placed shot to the head, the alien's armor sizzling as it collapsed. Alara pulled him forward. "We have to go." They fought their way to the exit just as the facility began to shake. The charges were set. They had only minutes before the entire structure collapsed. As they reached the outer perimeter, a massive explosion erupted behind them. The siphon was destroyed. The ground trembled, and above them, the Dominion's energy shields flickered and died. Darius' voice crackled through the radio. "It's down. The shields are down. Everyone, hit the command center now." John barely had time to catch his breath before Alara grabbed his hand. "Come on. The fight isn't over yet." They raced through the war-torn streets as the resistance forces pushed forward. Without their shields, the Dominion's command center was vulnerable. The once impenetrable structure was now exposed, and the resistance wasn't about to waste the opportunity. Explosions tore through the air as resistance fighters swarmed the facility, engaging the last of the Dominion forces in brutal combat. John and Alara fought side by side, cutting down enemies as they pushed deeper into the command center. The halls were lined with alien technology, but there was no time to stop and study it. They reached the central control chamber, where a towering Dominion commander awaited them. Unlike the others, this one was different, larger, more heavily armored, with an aura of authority that sent a shiver down John's spine. "You are nothing," the commander sneered, his voice cold and emotionless. "Your resistance is meaningless. Your planet belongs to the Dominion." John raised his rifle. "Not today." The commander moved with terrifying speed, lunging forward with a blade made of pure energy. John barely dodged in time, the weapon slicing through the air where he had stood a moment before. Alara struck fast, her movements fluid and deadly. She aimed for the gaps in the commander's armor, her attacks swift and precise. But he was powerful, too powerful. John saw an opening and took it. He fired a shot directly at the commander's exposed side. The blast struck true, and the alien staggered. Alara didn't hesitate. She drove her blade into his chest, piercing through armor and flesh. The commander let out a choked sound before collapsing. The room was silent except for the sound of John's heavy breathing. "It's over," Alara whispered. John glanced at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. "We did it." Outside, the resistance forces cheered as the Dominion's forces crumbled. Their command center was gone, their leadership shattered. For the first time in years, Earth was free. John looked up at the night sky, where the last of the Dominion ships were retreating. The war wasn't over, but tonight, they had won. He turned to Alara. "What now?" She smiled, exhaustion and relief shining in her eyes. "Now, we rebuild." John took her hand, squeezing it gently. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he had hope. The silence was almost deafening as John stood amid the wreckage, his mind racing. The battle was over, but the cost had been high. Resistance fighters staggered across the battlefield, bloodied but triumphant. The enemy ships were retreating, their once imposing presence now reduced to little more than shadows fading in the night sky. But despite their victory, There was no joy in the air, only the weight of what had been lost and the realization of what still lay ahead. John's chest tightened as he looked around. The battle had taken a heavy toll on them all. He thought back to the faces of those who had fought alongside him, the brave souls who had given everything. Bonner, Darius, and countless others who had perished in the conflict. Their deaths were still fresh in his mind, their sacrifices a constant reminder of the price of freedom. Alara stood beside him, her face unreadable as she stared at the smoldering ruins of the Dominion Command Center. Her normally confident demeanor had softened, and John could see the exhaustion etched into her features. She, too, had lost much in this war. Her home, her people, and her innocence. But somehow, she had held on, always pushing forward, always fighting. "We did it," John said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But at what cost?" Alara didn't answer immediately. She glanced around the battlefield, her eyes lingering on the fallen. "War always demands a price," she said quietly. "But sometimes that price is what makes victory worth it." John felt a pang in his chest. The war wasn't over. The Dominion may have been defeated on Earth, but their empire still stretched across the galaxy, and they would not stop until they had regained control. This was just the beginning of a much larger conflict. Alara turned to him, her gaze piercing. "We've won the battle, John, but the war is far from over. The Dominion will come back stronger, more determined than ever. We need to be ready." John nodded, knowing she was right. But in that moment, he couldn't shake the feeling of loss that hung over him. The faces of the dead were burned into his memory, and he could feel their absence like a weight on his soul. As the remaining resistance fighters regrouped and began to tend to the wounded, Alara led John toward a small clearing where a makeshift medical station had been set up. He knew there was little they could do to bring back the dead, but there was still work to be done. They had to rebuild, to carry on the fight. Alara stopped in front of a medic, a young woman who had been tending to a wounded soldier. "How is he?" Alara asked, her voice steady but laced with concern. The medic looked up, her face grim. "He's stable for now, but we need to get him to a proper facility. There's too much damage to his internal organs. He's not going to make it unless we get him help soon." John felt his stomach churn as he watched the medic work. Every life lost, every injury sustained was a reminder of the sacrifice they had made. But there was no time to dwell on it. They had to keep moving, keep fighting. "We can't give up now," Alara said, her voice low but determined. "We've taken the first step, but we have to be prepared for the next phase. The Dominion will strike back with everything they have, and we need to be ready." John nodded, but a part of him felt uncertain. How could they possibly prepare for what was coming? The Dominion's power was vast, their technology far beyond anything humanity had ever known. The resistance was strong, but they were still outnumbered, outgunned, and under-equipped. The odds were stacked against them, and John couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. As if on cue, the communication device on Alara's wrist beeped. She pulled it up, her eyes narrowing as she listened. "We've got a problem," she said, turning to John. "A Dominion fleet is already heading toward Earth. They're bringing reinforcements." John felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The battle had only just begun, and already the enemy was regrouping. There was no time to rest, no time to heal. The war would continue, and humanity's survival depended on their ability to adapt and fight back. "We have to strike first," Alara said, her voice hard. "We can't afford to wait for them to get to us." John looked around at the weary faces of the resistance fighters, each one more exhausted than the last. They had already given so much, and yet they were expected to continue the fight. He could see the doubt in their eyes, the fear of the unknown. How could they win when it seemed like the enemy had all the advantages? But then something clicked inside him. He thought of Bonner, Darius, and all the others who had sacrificed their lives for this moment. They couldn't let their deaths be in vain. They couldn't let fear or doubt control their actions. The resistance was more than just a ragtag group of survivors. They were a symbol of hope, of humanity's unyielding spirit. And no matter how hard the fight was, they would keep going. "We do this together," John said, his voice steady and clear. "We don't back down. Not now. Not ever." Alara met his gaze, a flicker of something softening in her eyes. "You're right. We've lost too much already. We can't afford to lose more." The tension in the air seemed to dissipate slightly as the resistance fighters rallied behind their leaders. There was no time to waste. A plan was quickly formed, a desperate but bold assault on the incoming Dominion fleet. It would be a suicide mission, but they had no choice. As the fighters prepared for the final assault, John felt a surge of adrenaline rush through his veins. The stakes had never been higher. They had to win, or everything they had fought for would be lost. The final battle was about to begin, and John knew that it would take everything they had. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of purpose. The ultimate sacrifice would be required to secure victory, and John was ready to pay that price. The enemy would not go down without a fight, but neither would they. Earth had been knocked down, but it had not been defeated. And as long as there was breath in his body, John would keep fighting for humanity's survival. The war wasn't over yet, but they had taken the first step toward victory. And in that moment, John knew that they had one final chance to win. The fight for Earth had reached its peak, and it was time to face the enemy head-on, no matter the cost. The ultimate sacrifice would be their final weapon, and with it, victory was within reach.